Damn. All right. As you heard, we're gonna get started. Welcome everybody to the event handling and state workshop. Um, I'm gonna be your presenter today, but first I'm gonna hand it off to Eric to talk about one of our other events going on next week.
Yeah, so Passion Talks is another event that Hack is running this quarter. Essentially, what the event is we invite people who are passionate about topics to come talk about them, as the name so suggests. But this coming Tuesday on November 9th, we have a Passion Talk. Umar, who was one of the people who did Passion Talks last quarter as well. The topic is going to be on web accessibility. So a lot of you guys might not be too familiar with this term or not know how it applies. But let's say that you guys are creating a simple web application. By this year. Well, web accessibility is really important for these apps. There's people out there who have vision impairments or audio impairments, and web accessibility is there to help make sure that as developers we can make choices in order to make our websites as accessible and inclusive to people as possible. So just to reiterate, the event's going to be Tuesday, November 9th at 7 p.m. It's going to be in Royce Hall 190, and yeah, that's pretty much it.
Thanks so much, Eric. All right. So today, like I said, we're going to be doing event handling and state. Just a reminder of where we are in the curriculum. We only have a few sessions left. Also, another reminder that we don't have a session on Thanksgiving break because we're not evil. Yeah. Here's the link to the slides and the README. I will keep this up for a bit. If you're good, let me know with a thumbs up. All right. Is anyone not good? Okay, I'll wait a little bit more. All right, awesome. Let's keep going. All right, here's the membership portal attendance code. I think this should be up. Hopefully it is. If it's not, somebody should get it set up. And also we have the feedback form with the opportunity for a raffle. So please, I really appreciate feedback to help improve our website. Also quarter to quarter. So we'd appreciate if you filled that out at the end of this. All right. And just some stuff to make sure you have for today's workshop. Make sure you have a text editor of your choice. I'm going to use VS Code. If you can use whatever you want, but you might not see some of the same things I'm seeing if you don't use VS Code. And then also make sure you have Node, since we need Node to create our React app, which we did a few weeks back. If you don't have them, the links are in the slides, so you can download them. So yeah. All right. Before we get started, a few notes. One on code along. Probably you know the drill if you've seen a workshop of ours before. What we recommend not coding along unless we're gonna state it explicitly, because our emphasis is making sure you understand the concepts. You can always look up code, specific code on documentation or our README at any time. And we're also gonna be setting aside specific time for you to work on your own on the code yourself. And please ask questions. We have mentors in the back if they could raise their hands. There's a lot of content going to be covered in this workshop. And if you're new to React or you're new to JavaScript or anything like that, might be overwhelming. So please don't be afraid to stop me or you need to reiterate something. That's what we're here for. Okay, so a brief review on what we've been leading up to or working on so far in our workshop curriculums. We have successfully taught you a bunch of components on the page. Very awesome. You have the components themselves, which are all, each of these are one component that has like a similar structure or a similar content. But with our props that we taught last session, we taught you how to make them a little bit different from each other. And we also taught you how to lay them out in a nice looking way. All of this also builds off of, JavaScript, HTML, CSS. So this is what we've led up to so far. But so far, nothing really happened. It just looks like a nice page to stare at. But you can't really interact with anything. The name is covered by the thing. But anyway, when you try to click stuff, nothing's happening. It's not what you expect out of a useful web application. Something like Facebook, for example. You're all probably familiar with this app. If you aren't, then I don't know what to tell you. But when you click on stuff, you can expect to be able to interact with it. You can like see event details, express whether you wanted to go to an event or something like that. Add friends, more like that. All right, so how does Facebook do this, right? So that's what we're going to be investigating today. But first, I just want to have a checkpoint since we are going to be working with code. Go ahead, if you don't remember how to create a React app, I put the steps up here, but go ahead and create a workspace, and I will explicitly say again when you should be coding along, so we can use this workspace while we're doing that. I just want to set it up now while nothing is happening. Yeah, so I'll leave this up for a few minutes. It's not that important, but if you wanted to do exercises later on, we can have this set up. If anyone has questions while this is happening, feel free to flag down a mentor as well. Oh yeah, again, if you complete the steps, give me a thumbs up so you can. Maybe 1 or 2 more minutes. The instructions are in the slides anyway. 1 or 2 more minutes and then. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and move on for the sake of timing. If you weren't able to finish it, these instructions are also in the slides, so hopefully you have everything you need. Okay. So event handlers is the first topic of today's workshop, and this is going to be how we get those interactive elements on our web app to happen. So first of all, what are events? Because event handlers implies events are involved. So there's a simple explanation. Events are usually just anything that's triggered by user action. It can be anything from clicking on something, to just mousing over it, hovering over it, or something like that. Here's some examples. You don't need to remember them. You can always look them up. In the README, I included documentation for every possible one, lots of them. But just some examples in React to give you a taste of what you can do. Okay, so what about the event handler? Well, the event handler at a very basic level is the action you perform in response to an event happening. Right? So this code is not real, but just for demonstration purposes, you know, and my action in response is to eat that pizza. It's probably very yummy. Yeah, so this is a basic idea. Again, this code is just for jokes. Do not expect this to actually work. Expect this to work instead. And so this is how it will actually kind of look in an actual React app. You will have a few things happening, but let's break it down together. So the first thing here is the event handler. And notice it's just a function that we define because we want to be able to specify what that action to perform in response to an event is. Right, so it's just a function using our arrow syntax. Hopefully you remember that. Next part is this event. Notice it's attached to the button element. All right, so we have a lot of different events, but I'm just using onClick as our example. And you'll notice it looks kind of like how props did, where we have this onClick and then we have an equals and then we set something to it. So you can think of it like that if you like. But basically, what we're doing is we're saying, I want to assign an event handler to this onClick event. So my event handler is the handle click one. And basically, now whenever I click this button, it's going to run our event handler, and whatever code's in there is going to happen. Any questions about that, like higher level concept? Awesome. Okay, so in that case, let's handle some events. I'm going to do a quick demo on that. Let's bring up my code. I also npx create React app. So like normal, we have the directory structure. Inside of source, you'll find app.js. I'm just going to delete all of these contents because I don't need them for now. I don't need this either. And in app.css, I don't want any of that either, so I'll delete that as well. So we'll just start with a blank slate. Let me close all of these so that you can see the code. Is the code enough? Is anybody having trouble seeing it? Okay, so we'll say, just to be safe, I'll make it a little bit larger. Not large enough, but it's annoying. Okay. Okay, so let's handle some events. So first thing, I'm just going to replace this with a button since that was in the example anyway. Let's just do a simple button. Says click me because it wants to be clicked. And then let's set up our event handler. All right, so event handler, just like we went over, is a function that we define, and it does whatever we want. So for now, I'll just do something trivial, like log out a hello message, just to make sure it's even working. Okay, and now we can attach the onClick event to our button and pass in the handle click function. So far, this should be pretty one-to-one with the slide example. Save this, and I'm going to npm start in the terminal to show this up on the browser. See what it looks like. By the way, any questions so far? I know I haven't done much, but it's always good to check in. Okay, cool. All right, so once this gets running, we should see a button on the screen since that's the only thing I've put in here. And it is. It says click me. Let me make that a little bigger. And when I click this, I don't expect anything to happen on the screen because my handle click only logs something to the console. Let's actually check out the console and see if anything happened. And if we look at the console, we should see this hello message right here, indicating that every time I click, it's gonna print hello in the console. You can see that there's like this counter here. If you do it too many times in a row, it's just accumulating them in one message. All right, cool. So a simple example, hopefully makes sense. For the first or the second checkpoint, I guess, try this on your own. Go ahead and create a button on your own and create a win handler and an event, and then assign that handler to the on-click event. If you've already done that for some reason, or if you do that in like no time at all, you can also do the same with the on mouse over event, which is a little bit more spicy. Basically, if you hover over the button, it should print stuff on the screen. So I'll give you guys about 30 minutes to try this out. And then I'll kick in. Also, mentors, feel free. Also feel free to ask mentors for help if you need it while you're working on this. Was everybody able to unlock some of this? Well, hopefully you're able to start at least. If you weren't able to get it done, that's okay. I'm gonna do it with you guys anyway. I'm gonna do the bonus right now. So I just want to keep it moving in the case of time. I don't want to run out of time. So let me do the mouse over really quickly just to show you what that one looks like. I'll do another const handle. I'll do another event handler. This one's gonna handle the mouse over event. And this one, I guess I will just log hover or something, since that's what they're going to be doing. And now in the same button, I will add another event. So I have the on click already, but I want another event. I want the on mouse over event. And I want the event handler to be handle mouse over. So now I would expect that when this event happens on this button, it's going to call my handle mouse over function and just do this for now. Let me save that and we'll see if that actually happens. I will refresh. Okay, so if I hover over this, I should get the hover message in the console. And we see every time I hover over it, it's giving me that hover message. And I can still click on it and get the hello message. I can just do both now since I have two events attached to that button. Does that make sense to everybody? Any questions? Cool. Okay. In that case, let's keep going. I want to keep talking about event handlers. Specifically, the format of how we've been making event handlers so far, being this basic function. I want to ask you guys if you can identify any limitation to this approach, or this format of an event handler. And maybe not. Oh, yes. Right. So one thing is this, it's not very robust, I would say, is kind of an explanation of your explanation. Right, so in a case like this, I need an event handler for every slightly different behavior that I would want, right? So both of these things log something. They just log something different. And it might be annoying to keep doing this for all the things that are slightly the same, but slightly different. And we already know through functions that we can alleviate this issue by introducing an argument to our function. But it doesn't really look like you can pass an argument in this syntax, right? I mean, the closest you could try is maybe something like this. But let's try this, right? Let me just show you what happens. If I introduce an argument to my handle click function, and I try to pass something in, right? And I save this, and we go back over here and we refresh. I'm trying to click it and nothing is happening, right? So evidently something went wrong. It's no longer logging anything, and obviously it's not logging this hello message. So this isn't satisfactory. But we do want to be able to do this because it's useful, right? So the answer is no. So let's take a different approach, right? So this is what we started out with, but let's try something else because we know that this event just takes a function, right? It's an arbitrary function we define. So if we know that, let's make it work this way. This might look like a lot, but we only really care about this part. So let's zoom in here. So just the button part with the on-click event. So it's a little bit different, but the idea is still the same. This is still a function, right? This is an arrow syntax function, and I'm passing it in as my event handler. This function just happens to call a handle click function. And since it's a call to a function, I can actually use an argument now. Right, so it's not that I've done anything weird or anything. This is just a function that happens to call another function. So more concisely, it might look like this when you actually code it up. I just separated it into multiple but it's the same thing. We still have this arrow syntax function that does one thing. Oh, whoops. That should not say console log. That should say handle click. That's my bad. But let's just show you what that looks like. All right, so this didn't work earlier. Let's change it out with what we just went over. I will pass an arrow function into here. And in this arrow function, I'm just going to call handle click with a specific argument. And when we save that, right, handle click again, I changed it to take one argument, and it's just going to log that argument. Refresh here. When I click this now, I should get hello. And we do see hello. If I change this to like yeet instead, I should be able to get yeet every time I click it. And we can see that this is more helpful maybe if you have multiple buttons that do slightly different things. Right, so that's why the checkpoint here is to create another button that does something slightly different than the first one. Right, so modify your handle click to take one argument and use the approach we just went over, passing in an arrow function that calls our handle click to make two buttons do slightly different things, but with the same behavior. Right. Use the same function, but with slightly different behavior. That's what I meant to say. Probably another two on that. Again, if you have questions while you're working on it, feel free to flag them. I will check in after 2 minutes. hands where you're at. All right. I will just show the same example, just for those of you who weren't able to get it on your own. We'll add a button. Actually, I mean, it doesn't really have to be a button. Let me just show you that it doesn't have to be a button either. We'll add anything, any element. I'll add another on click. Why is there so much red squiggly? Oh my goodness. We'll add another on click. And we'll use the same approach with the arrow function that calls our handle click with something a little bit different. So the red is because I need to wrap all this in a div. If you don't recall, I almost messed that up. But if you don't recall, that's why you wrap it in a div. It's technically still one element. It just has two things inside of it. Okay. And handle click still works the exact same way that I showed. So one of these is going to give me yeet. The other one is going to give me he. And you can see that this is just a paragraph, and I can still attach this event to it. That was just to showcase that it doesn't need to be a button, even though we're going to use buttons extensively in this workshop. Any questions on that? All right, sounds good. Let's keep going. All right, so by now, hopefully you feel somewhat like a certified event handler, right? We've been able to attach events to certain components, handle them with our own functions. Should be good. So as a small exercise, I want you to try to think about how you would do this with what we've learned so far. Basically, whenever you click a button, I want a counter on the screen to go up by 1, right? But don't worry if you can't figure it out. Just think about it over the break, which we will have right now. Boom, boom, boom. I guess it's kind of an early break, but you know, Zoom fatigue in person, is that real? We'll come back at 7:46. There's a lot left. This is a good time for a break. But yeah, you can ruminate on that other problem in the meantime. Just press your legs, go to the bathroom. I don't know. Have fun. All right, welcome back, everybody. Hopefully the break was nice. Let's try that counting exercise I was talking about earlier. If you weren't able to get it, don't worry about it. We'll just see what happens when we do it together. So let me just comment all this out for now. And I'll just start with our counter here. So I want to return at least something that says counter. And then some number is going to go there. And I want a button. And I know I want it to have an on click eventually. But not sure what that's going to do yet. But we'll just make the event handler, so handle click. And I guess my natural reaction is going to be to try to use a variable for our counter and then increment that every time I click on this button. Right, so far, I just have the handle click, nothing's doing. I have a counter just to like match what's on that on this thing. And then I have a button that says click me. We'll attach the on click to the handle click. So nothing we haven't seen so far. So my intuition says I want to use a variable to keep track of where the counter's at. So let me get a variable here. I'll start it at 0 since it should start at 0. And instead of counter, I'm sorry, next to counter, I will go ahead and make that variable show up on the screen. So this is just JSX stuff where you can use the curly braces to put JavaScript in here, and it'll evaluate it as JavaScript. Let's just say this right now. And so far, we do get our little counter 0. The click me does nothing because I haven't actually put anything in our event handler yet. So let's try doing something. What we want to do is increase that num clicks. I'll just increment it by 1. And we'll see if that works. All right, let me refresh just to make sure. And I can click it all as much as I want, but our counter remains at 0 for some reason. Now, maybe I did something wrong. Let's just investigate. I just want to see if num clicks actually get updated. So I'll log it out as you do when you debug. Oops. And I'll click it and hopefully it does work, but not sure. Okay, so we can see in the console that this num clicks variable is going up, but for whatever reason, it's not going up on the actual screen. And this is why I said, don't worry if you can't make it work, because as it turns out, we're not very good at handling events yet. All we can do is log stuff, and that's not very interesting. So we need to figure out, if we can't even increment a counter, what are we missing? And so I didn't teach you that yet, but unlike most professors, I will tell you how to do it instead of leaving that as an exercise for you. Right, so the answer is state, and this is the second part of the workshop where I'm going to talk about what state is. Right now, state is a pretty vague term. You know, it could be California, it could be the states of matter. I don't know about that one, or whatever that is, or if you're on Reddit, I guess. But our state in React is not any of that. State that we're going to be talking about at a very elementary level is, you can think of it as data local to a component. And you can change that data over time or modify it as you see fit. And you might be saying, well, Miles, isn't that just a variable? And you would be right in saying that, but there's one key difference between state and normal variables. And that difference is that whenever you update state, it's going to trigger what's called a re-render of the screen. Re-render, basically just think of it as refreshing the content. Right? So that's sort of has to do with why when you updated a variable, nothing changed on the screen. But hopefully when we update state, it will update the screen. So that's just the high level overview. Any questions on that? All right, let's get into, I guess, what it looks like. So when we want to use states, the first thing we need to do is import some stuff. Specifically this part, this use state from React. And this will go at the top of whatever file you want to use state in. So whatever component you happen to be working with and you want state in, you will always do this first. Next, you want to create your state variable, and it looks pretty different from how you create just a regular variable. But let's break it down together. This is just kind of like placeholder values. So most of these things, and I will point them out, most of these things can be replaced with whatever you want. But we'll break it down together. The first thing to notice is that you say here is returning an array with 2 things inside of it. Oh. Okay, I guess we're not noticing that. We're noticing that this is a function call, actually. And use state then is a function, and what it takes is the initial state. This is whatever you want your state variable to start out at. So right now, I just put initial state, but like I said, that's just placeholder code. You should actually put a value in there, like a string or a number or an empty array or something like that. Okay, now we can notice the 2 things in this array. Okay, order of the slides got screwed up. But the first thing here is going to be what's actually storing the data. So you can think of this as, when you do let my var equals 1, my var has that data in it. This is kind of like that, right? So this is the actual data itself. And this is what we're going to be using to properly update our state variables. And we'll see why later on. But for now, we'll take it for granted. Any questions so far? Okay, cool. All right, so just an example, since that was all kind of like pseudocode-y, this is a text state variable that you might make. So notice I replaced state and set state with text and set text. And my use state now has an actual value in it. Right now, all I'm doing is logging it to the console, but we should be able to do more interesting stuff. Right, so initial state will be the string hello. So it should start out inside of this variable is going to just have the string hello. If we change it later on, it should change. And we will go over how we do that. So let's first just set up our state variable. And let me get rid of this counter example since we don't need it anymore. Or we'll revisit it later, but we don't need it right now. I'll bring back this simple 2-button example that we had earlier. What I want to do is I want to, instead of just logging to the console some useless stuff, I actually want to change what the button says after I click on it. So we'll make a state variable for the text on that button. And it'll just start out as click me like it is right now. Okay, so this, you can't see it all on one screen. Oh, that's really small though. Let me just increase the width. Okay, cool. All right. So this is how you create any state variable, right? We use the use state here. And I just want to show it. So that's just how we get it started, right? So let me save this. We'll see what happens. We get an error. And it says use state is not defined. So can anybody tell me what I missed? Yeah. Exactly. Right. So hopefully this has happened to me a lot when I actually do programming. Oh, sorry, when I actually make apps. Don't forget your import statements. They are important. Otherwise, you'll get errors and you don't know why they happen. All right. Now I save it. Now there's no issues. Text is fine because use state is actually imported. Oh, what is happening? Okay, don't know why that happened, but it should be all good. All right, let's go back now. So that was just a quick demo. The next thing we can do with state is, the next thing I wanted to explain was this quick little note. Some of you might have thought it was a little weird that we were getting an array this way from our use state function. So I just wanted to touch on it. It's not super important that you understand this, but I wanted to touch on it just so nobody was like, bro, you are not explaining anything to us. So basically, at a high level, I don't want to get too deep, but we're kind of giving names to the data within the array that use state gives us, right? So use state gives us an array. That much makes sense. What might not make sense is why I have it written as this brackets state comma set state. And so the idea is use state gives us an array with 2 items in it, and I'm just getting them, but I'm naming them at the same time I'm getting them. Right? So kind of like when I name a variable, my var equals, and then I can do like the result of an equation or something. I'm naming like 2 things at once instead of just one variable. Right, so the first one corresponds to the first array element that use state gives us back. So I just named it state in this case. The second one corresponds to the second array element that use state gives us. So I just named that one set state. So I named them so I can just refer to them later on. Like I said, it doesn't really need to make sense too much right now, but I didn't want to leave it unsaid. Okay, moving on to the next thing. After we create a state variable, we can display it on the screen, just like what we want to try to do with counter. And we do it the same way we do with any other variable in JSX. We use the curly braces, and then we put in the name of your variable. And so as an example with the text, if we remember this example from before, I just put the curly braces around the text state variable, and it should start up on the screen. And we're going to state that up. I'm just going to put our text variable that I made earlier, and I'm going to replace the click me message with that instead. Let me get rid of the mouse over because it's kind of detracting from what I care about. Okay. So when I save this, nothing changes on the screen because, well, it's still click me, right? So let me change this maybe. And then we can see if it's actually mirroring this state variable. Okay, so I saved that and now it just says click because my initial state, I changed it to click. I'll change it back to click me, but that was just to illustrate that the state is being used to influence what's being displayed on the screen now. Any questions so far? Okay, then let's keep going. This is something more interesting, meaning it's your turn to try. So go ahead and do the same things I did, and don't forget to import like I did actually. Import the use state from that. Make your own state variable. Do whatever you want. Work towards counting. And then also make sure you set that initial value. Don't just word that doesn't. And then render it on the screen somewhere. So this one should be one of the shorter ones, so I'll just give it like 2 minutes to try that out on your own. Feel free to More than 2 minutes, but how did everybody do on that? Get a chance to work on. Okay. Hopefully it wasn't too bad because it's kind of what I did here. So it should mirror, or whatever you did should like have the same structure. So we'll move on to the next thing, which is changing a state variable. So I mentioned earlier that we use this set state part to properly update our variable, our state variable. So let's see how we actually get into that. Again, we'll zoom in here because this is the only part we really care about. In fact, we only really care about this line. Right, so notice set state is also a function. It takes one argument. This argument specifies what to set our state to. So this is the new value that's going to overwrite whatever the previous value was. Right, so pretty simple looking. All you do is supply an actual value in there. So as an example, if we have a change text function, you can imagine this happens at some point, but you pass in whatever you want to update that to, and then I'm just going to set text to that new value. Right, so it's going to change text from whatever it used to be, for example, hello, to whatever I called this change text function with. Any questions about that? Hopefully makes sense, at least at a high level. Let me show you what it can look like and when we actually put it into an application. So our key here is set text. And what I want to be doing is I want to be changing, right? Our original goal is to change this text when I click on the button. So inside of this handle click, I'm going to go ahead and set text to something different. We'll just do something like clicked, right? So indicator that we have clicked this button. And it just so happens that handle click no longer needs an argument, so we will just go ahead and get rid of it. So again, we still have a handle click handler. We have our on click event binded to that handler. Our text state starts as click me, but whenever we click, we should set it to clicked. So I'm going to save this and refresh just in case. When I click this button, I should change the text. And it does. Right, so now the button says clicked instead. And we can see this is a stark contrast from the counter, which refused to change when we were using a normal variable. Any questions? All right, sounds good. Okay, so again, another checkpoint. Go ahead and try a similar thing on your own, right? Have an on click on a button element, or it could be any element, but we'll use button for simplicity. And then change that state variable that you just made earlier, right? So whenever you click that button, it should change whatever is shown or whatever the state variable has inside of it. Again, this one is not too many steps, so 2 minutes from now, checking. All right. Hopefully you got a chance to at least try it out. Again, it should somewhat mirror the structure that I have here, where we have our state variable starts as something, and then on this click, on this click, I'm going to set the text to something else. Just push this down so we don't really look at it right now. Yeah. Okay, so if there's no questions, we can keep moving. Again, I'm going to pose a question to you guys of whether or not you think this form of overwriting the previous state with a new state is a limiting way to do things. And can anybody tell me why it is limited? Yeah. Right, yeah. So especially in code like this, I'm only able to really set it to one specific thing, unless I am going to be doing like a bunch of calculations with some random variables. Additionally, right, more often than not, especially in the counter scenario, we want to set our new state based on our old state somehow. And this doesn't really give us the leeway to kind of try to do that, because it's just overriding new state. So in React, with this set state stuff, there's a very specific way we do this. And again, we're going to zoom in on this part here because this is where we care about. So there might be a lot here, but we'll break it down together. We still have the same set state call, so it's not like I'm using a different function here. But instead of just the new state, I am passing in a function. So notice again, this is an arrow syntax function, right? Takes one argument. This argument represents the previous state that the whatever state variable you're using had. Let me hide this real quick. Right, so I can reference this previous state inside of this function. And the idea is you're going to do something with previous to get a new state, which you return from this function. So whatever is returned here is going to be the value that replaces the old state inside of our state variable. Right, again, the assumption being that new state was somehow derived from prev, which is the previous state. So as an example, this is with the text. What I'm doing here is I'm checking the previous state and seeing what it was to determine what my new state is going to be. Okay, so the previous state, if it's click me, I'm going to say my new state is unclick me. Otherwise, I'll just say my new state is click me. Hopefully that example kind of makes sense. I'm going to run it. Oh, sorry. I'm going to run it in our app, our running example as well. So let's get rid of this boring stuff. And instead, we're going to use our new improved previous syntax. Right, so again, this is just the function, the arrow function, takes an argument. I can name this whatever I want. but I just like to just name it prev for simplicity. And we're gonna do that same thing, right? So right now it's kind of boring where I click on it once, changes, and nothing happens after that. So I'm gonna change it to do toggling between click me and unclick me, so that it's a little more interesting. People have a little more engagement. I don't know what people are using this app already, but they'll have a little more engagement. All right, so we're gonna do that same check. If text is equal to click me, I will just change the states to unclick me. All right, so again, this return statement, whatever you return from this function is going to be what replaces the old state. Right, and then I'll do the else case. And in all other cases, I just want my new state to be the original message we had, which was click me. Okay. Oops, I said text instead of pre. That's my bad. All right, so we're checking the previous state, seeing what it's equal to right now, in order to inform our decision of what the new state should be. Any questions on that? Yeah. No, right. So the other way still works. We can still just do set text with a new value. This format is only if you want to base the new value on your previous value. Yeah. So if you do want that, right, if you want the new state to be based off the old state, you need to use this format where you pass in a function. Hopefully that answers your question. You also had a question? You mean the state variable? Yeah, so I could make this an array, I could make this an object, I could make it whatever I want, as long as it's a value that can be represented in JavaScript. Yep. I'm not exactly sure what you mean by that. The reason we're using it inside the set text is because, well, or not actually, I see what you're saying. I see. Yes, you could put this function. That's what you're saying. You could put this function outside set text and then pass it in like this. Is that what you meant? Oh, right. So that gets into the other part, which is the okay, but why? I'm not gonna show that right now. Just hold on to your question. We'll show that later. But I just want to get through this so we can see what this looks like first. So let me go back to what we had before. That's a good question though. Right. So I'm gonna save this now. So hopefully we can see what it looks like when now I'm basing my new states off my previous state. Let me refresh this. Okay, right, so we started out as click me, and since it's click me right now, I expect it to turn to unclick me. And it does, and since it's unclick me now, I expect it to turn back to click me. I do that as much as I want. Super fun. Lovely interaction. Okay, so let's get to your question. Okay, but why do we have to do it this way? Why can't we just use the text variable, right? The short answer, and the only answer I'm going to give you right now, unless you want to talk after, is that because useState is actually what's called an asynchronous function. Come to next session to find out what that means, because we're covering asynchronous JavaScript. For now, we're just going to take it in for granted. Just do it. I can show you later on that it causes problems if you try to use directly just the text variable. This is the safer option, and that's why it even exists in the first place. Okay. Hopefully that was a somewhat satisfying, unsatisfying answer. Okay, we already did this. So the next thing is to revisit the counter. So now that we have all these things we can do with state, and we're not just working with normal variables, you should be able to implement this counter. So you can do it in the existing workspace you have, or you can create a new React app, either way. This one might take a little bit longer, so I'll give it like 5 to 6 minutes. Get this counter working, right? So again, we want it so that we click a button and then a counter counts up every time you click it. And that displays on the screen and updates properly. Should have to use everything we've covered so far. If you have questions, flag down a mentor. Good luck, y'all. I'll also put on some beats. Like I said, I'm going to show just a demonstration of how I would implement the counter, just in case you guys weren't able to do it or just want to see an example. So I have a fresh React app here. I know I want a counter. So first of all, let me not forget to import anything. I want to use state, so I'm going to import use state. Let me get rid of this sidebar. And I know I want one piece of state at least, just to keep track of how many clicks I've done so far. So let's make that num clicks, set num clicks equals use state. And my counter should start at 0. So we'll just pass 0 into there. While I'm here, let me get rid of this. Okay, so all I've done so far is set up the variable. Now let me, inside of an H2, I'm going to render that variable by using the curly braces again for the JavaScript. This should render the numClicks variable. Let me just save this right now so we can see it at an intermediate stage. Let me npm start. And it should show up over here. If it wants to be cool. So once it loads, we should see this counter H2 tag with the number of clicks. And since number of clicks starts at 0, it should just be counter 0. And yeah, that is exactly what happens. Now we want the click handling. So I'll make another event handler. Right, just a function. I don't need to take arguments, so I won't specify any. And what I want to do is I want to increase the number of clicks. So it's going to depend on the previous number of clicks. So I will use this prev version of setting state. Right, so I have access to prev, and all I want to do is I want to return that previous value plus 1. So I will return prev plus 1. Right, so if the previous value is 0, I'll just return 1. If the previous value is 1, I'm going to return 2, and so on. Right, math exists. Math works. Right now, I don't have a button, so let me put this handle click on a button. On click, bind the on click event to my event handler. And then I will just have it say click me because it wants to be clicked. Okay, so I have a button and I have my counter. My counter shows the number of clicks, and since I'm updating that and its state, not a normal variable, should update on the screen as well. Let's see. Nice. Now I can click this as much as I want, and it'll keep going up. Maybe I can try to demonstrate why we don't want to to use the previous value. Without using that format. So this is if you were trying to do it with how you used to do it, you would do something like this, where you would increment by 1 on the new. If I do this, I'll grant you that if I do this, it does work. But the reason why it's not great is because if I, for some reason, did 2 updates in a row, after 1 click, it should be at 2, but it only does 1, right? Because that's what I was mentioning, is that something goes wrong, has to do with asynchronicity, but this doesn't actually do what we expect, which was increment it by 2. Right, so that's why we all use the prev version of setting state if we want it to rely on previous state. Any questions about that? That last thing was just an aside, so the main thing is that this works. All right, let's go back. I just have one last section here, and it's just I wanted to go over a common application that we see state being used for, and it's maintaining an array of items to show up on the screen. Like most of the tutorial things will do your to-do app where you input to-do list type items. We're not going to do that, but it's just an example of this happening in action. An array of items to show up on the screen is exactly what this to-do app is. So you might be asking, isn't it just like normal state, right? I just need to make sure I initialize with an empty array and I'm done. Unfortunately, sorry. So fortunately it is, but I just wanted to make some things clear because there are some considerations when we work with an array that might not be apparent, at least at first glance. And I just want to make it super explicit for you guys so you don't run into the issue of being like, how do I actually do this? Right, so these are the 2 things we want to consider. How do we update a state array properly, right, using that prev format? And how do we use this to render many items on the screen? Let's just go through the first thing first. So what I have here is an example of what you might do when you are updating a state array. Right, we use the previous value because we want to maintain what was already in the array. We just want to add to it, right? So the first thing I'm doing here is I'm making a copy of the previous array. The reason I make a copy is because I don't want to touch the actual previous array. But prev.slice lets us do that. Then I'm going to use this new array and push my new value, right? It can be whatever value I want. Some item that I want to add. This is pseudocode. And then I will return that new array with that new item. And this lets me preserve all the previous values in my array while adding a new one on. And then the next thing, using a state array to render items, we can use the map function. So we learned about that last session. I'm going to go over it again, just in case you don't remember. But basically, it maps every item in the array to a component that can actually be rendered on screen. Obviously, it's not very flattering to just render raw data on the screen. So we would like to put that data into visually appealing components. This is how we might do it. Right, if I have an items array, I'm going to map each individual item, to an element, a paragraph element that just has that item in it. So this isn't that visually appealing, but this is just a bare bones example of what you might do. And since we know map returns an array, we can put it into a variable and just render this variable. If that doesn't make sense, I'll show what I mean by this in a demo. But so far, at a high level, any questions? Okay, cool. So this is more of a fun thing anyway, because I just want to show you that this is possible. And so you have less question marks when you run into it later. So I'm going to do a fun example where I'm going to build on our counter so that every time I click the button, not only do I increment our master counter, but I add a new counter to the screen and it starts at 0. Because it's funny. I don't know. So let's look at that. Okay. So what I'm going to do is not only do I need this master counter's state, I need another state variable, which is going to be our array of counters. So I'm going to say counters, set counters, and it starts out empty because no additional counters need to be on the screen until later. And so again, this is what we're used to. I'm just setting as an empty array to begin with. I'm also going to go ahead and just render this on the screen kind of willy-nilly for now. We can just put counters in. Or actually, let me do it like this for later. So it's trivial right now, but it'll serve a purpose later. Okay. But this is just another aspect of React where you can render an array of things just by putting it in between the curly braces. So if we see what that looks like right now, it's empty because there's nothing in it. But if I put something in it, I think it will update with a 0. Yeah. And this is just the raw data, which is why we would like to map it later. But for now, we're going to worry about the actual updating of the counter array. Every time I click on this button, we're going to use the same button. Every time I click on it, I also want to add a new counter to my set or my list, my array of counters. I'm going to set counters. It's going to rely on the previous array. And I'll do that same thing. I'll make a new array that's copy using prev.slice. I'm going to add to this array just the value of the new counter, right? So the new counter value should be starting at 0. And I'll return that array. And we'll see what this does so far. Because right now we do have all the parts in place where I'm updating the array with a new value every time. So if I click, every time I click, I should get a new 0. And this is just the product of me blatantly rendering the array with no formatting. That's why it just looks like that. But you can see we are pushing a new 0 every time. Now the other part is we actually want to increment every counter, right? Every intermediate counter. So this one's not as important for you to understand, but I'm going to show it because it's part of the demo. What I'm going to do is I'm going to map the current values to, oh my gosh, there's so much happening on the screen. Let me increase the size. I'm going to map the current values in this copy of the array to the current values plus 1. So I'll just return counter plus 1. So if you don't remember, map is going to go through an array, and at each element of that array, it's going to do something to it, which is specified by whatever I put in here. And whatever I return is the new value of the array. Right, so I'm basically replacing every element in the array with that element plus 1. So this will increment every counter in my array. Hopefully that makes sense. Any questions on that before I keep going? Okay. And then we push the new one still, so that's fine and dandy. So let's save this, and we should get a bunch of counters incrementing as they're added. Refresh. Okay. Moment of truth, 0, 1, 0, 2, 1, 0, 2, 1, 0, blah, blah, blah. Right, so each counter that's already existing is getting incremented, and I am always adding a new counter at the end here. Okay. So far, so good. All right. Now the other part is, well, making it not look like that, you know. So what we want to do is we want to map each counter to a actual component or something of the sort. So I'm going to take this render counters I made earlier, and instead of just in the raw counters array, I'm going to map that array to something else. Each counter, I want it to look like, oh my gosh, each counter, I want it to look like a component that has a little bit of pizzazz to it. I don't know. I'll make an H3, I guess. So instead of just the normal counter value, I'm going to put that counter into an H3 tag so that all of the counters in my array show up as H3s, and they're labeled with counter. Right, so now I won't just get raw data, I will get actual H3s. Each one of them is labeled with counter because of this part. And then the actual counting value comes afterward. Right, so I can refresh this to show from the beginning. Every time I click, new counter is added, and they keep going up. We can go all the way to the bottom for the newest counter. Right, and if you wanted it to look like how it does in the slides, that's some of the Flexbox fun stuff that we learned about last time. I'm not going to waste your time with because but the demo is in the README. So if you want to check it out for whatever reason, you can. But yeah, that is everything I had for today. Please fill out the feedback form if you are so inclined. It really helps us out. Thank you all for being here, and come out to next session if you want to learn more about asynchronicity, just like kind of what we talked about today. I don't think asynchronicity is a word, but you know what I mean. Thank you. Yeah. You go to this link, it's really cool. It opens a form where you can get a raffle if you answer this question correctly. Good stuff.